The champagne flowed like water at our engagement party, sparkling under the crystal chandeliers of Boston's most exclusive hotel. Alexander's family had spared no expense for the occasion. The grand ballroom dripped with white orchids, seafood towers gleamed on mirrored platters, and a string quartet played softly in the corner. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching my fiancé chat with the mayor while his mother showed off my ring to her friends, the 5-carat diamond catching the light with every gesture. "Isn't it all just perfect, Olivia?" whispered Camille, my soon-to-be sister-in-law, squeezing my arm. "You're marrying into Boston's finest. The Whitmores have been here since the Mayflower, you know." I smiled politely, having heard this particular fact approximately 47 times since Alexander proposed 3 months ago. The Whitmores were old money, the kind that was so secure they didn't need to talk about it, though they somehow always managed to work it into conversation anyway. "Alex certainly seems happy," I replied, watching him throw his head back in laughter at something the senator said. "He should be. Father says you're the perfect match." Camille's eyes swept over me appraisingly. Pretty, intelligent, and from a good family. Her gaze flickered to my mother across the room, who looked slightly uncomfortable in her designer dress, borrowed from me for the occasion. Though not quite as established as ours, of course. I bit back a retort. The Whitmore's obsession with lineage was exhausting, but I'd learned to let such comments slide. Tonight was about celebration, not confrontation. "Your mother outdid herself with the planning," I said instead, changing the subject. Camille nodded, glowing with family pride. "Mother has exceptional taste. Though she did mention you were surprisingly agreeable during the arrangements. Most brides want to control every detail." What she meant, though she was too polite to say it, was that most women with my financial standing would have insisted on contributing. In truth, I had offered several times, but Victoria Whitmore would hear none of it. "A Whitmore wedding is arranged by the Whitmores," she declared, and that was that. I was saved from responding by Alexander's arrival. He slipped an arm around my waist and pressed a kiss to my temple. "Having fun, darling?" he asked, his breath warm against my ear. "It's lovely," I said, leaning into him. "Though I've barely seen you all night." "Sorry about that. Father insisted I meet the new partners from Goldman." He squeezed my waist. "You know how it is." I did know. Alexander was being groomed to take over Whitmore Investments, the family firm that had managed the fortunes of Boston's elite for generations. These networking events were part of the job, a job he excelled at with his natural charm and Ivy League polish. Of course, I smiled up at him. "Go do what you need to do. I'm fine." He studied my face, his blue eyes warm with affection. "You're too good to me, Olivia. I still can't believe I convinced a woman like you to marry me." "A woman like me." He'd said it before, but tonight it struck a different chord. What did Alexander actually know about me, the real me? He knew I was a financial analyst at Morgan Stanley. He knew I graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Business School. He knew my father was a college professor who died when I was 12, and that my mother raised me on her own. What he didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that my mother had been a housekeeper. That we'd lived in a tiny apartment in Dorchester, where I'd done homework by flashlight during power outages when bills couldn't be paid. That my Harvard scholarship had covered tuition but nothing else, so I'd worked 3 jobs and lived on ramen to make ends meet. Alexander had never seen that Olivia. He'd met me after I'd clawed my way up, after I'd learned to dress the part, speak the part, be the part. After I'd leveraged my finance degree into a job that paid enough for me to help my mother retire, to buy designer clothes, to seamlessly integrate into his world. But would he love me if he knew? If he saw the real me, not just where I'd landed, but where I'd come from? The question followed me through the rest of the evening, trailing me like a shadow as we said our goodbyes, as Alexander guided me into the back of his Bentley, as his driver took us back to his Beacon Hill townhouse. "Did you enjoy yourself?" Alexander asked, loosening his bow tie as we entered his immaculate home. "It was lovely," I said, kicking off my Louboutins with relief. 5-inch heels were a form of elegant torture I'd grown accustomed to, but never learned to love. "Your mother outdid herself. Only the best for a Whitmore bride." His smile was proud, possessive almost. He walked to the bar cart in the corner of his living room. "Nightcap? Please." I watched him pour 2 fingers of scotch into crystal tumblers. Alexander moved with the easy confidence of a man who had never questioned his place in the world. His every gesture reflected privilege, not the showy kind, but the bone-deep security of someone who had never worried about money, never feared the future, never wondered if he belonged. "To us," he said, handing me a glass and clinking his against it. "And to the future Mrs. Whitmore." I took a sip, letting the expensive liquor burn a path down my throat. "About that. I've been thinking about my name." A slight furrow appeared between his brows. "Your name?" "Yes. I'm considering keeping Bennett. Professionally, at least." Alexander looked surprised. "Really? I thought we'd discussed this." "The Whitmore name opens doors, Olivia. Especially in finance." "I know. But I've built my career as Olivia Bennett. It's who I am." His expression softened, but there was a hint of disappointment there. "Of course, darling. If it's important to you." But I could tell it wasn't what he wanted. The Whitmore name was part of the package, part of what made our match so perfect in his family's eyes. Later, as Alexander slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. The name debate was just a symptom of a larger question that gnawed at me. Was I marrying a man who loved me for me, or for the polished, successful woman who fit so neatly into his world? I turned to study his face, peaceful in sleep. Alexander was kind. He was generous. He had never been anything but adoring toward me. But he had also never been tested. He'd never seen me struggle. Never seen me fail. Never had to consider whether I was worth loving without the trappings of success. The idea took root as I watched him sleep. I needed to know, really know, if Alexander loved me for me. Not for my Harvard degree, my 6-figure salary, or my ability to charm his social circle. Just me, Olivia, the girl from Dorchester who had once been so poor that dinner was sometimes just crackers and peanut butter. I needed to test him. "You want to do what?" Riley nearly spat out her latte. It was Saturday morning. Alexander was in London on business, and I was having coffee with my best friend at a small cafe far from the Whitmore's usual haunts. "Test him," I repeated, stirring my coffee. "I want to see if Alexander loves me for me, or for the polished version of me that fits into his world." Riley leaned back, crossing her arms. "And how exactly do you plan to do that? You can't exactly erase your Harvard degree or your job at Morgan Stanley." "No," I admitted. "But I can tell him I lost it all." Riley's eyebrows shot up. "Define all." "My job. My savings. My financial security." I leaned forward, warming to the idea. "I'll tell him I made a bad investment. Something risky and reckless that wiped me out." "That's insane," Riley shook her head. "He'll never believe it." You're the most financially cautious person I know. People make mistakes. Even financial analysts. I shrugged. Besides, it doesn't have to be forever. Just long enough to see how he reacts. And if he reacts badly? If he breaks up with you? Then I'll know he's not the man I thought he was. I met Riley's skeptical gaze. Wouldn't you rather know that before walking down the aisle? Riley sighed, running a hand through her short dark hair. Look, I get it. Alexander comes from a different world. But he adores you, Liv. Anyone can see that. He adores the me he knows. The successful, polished me. But would he adore the real me? The one who grew up poor? The one who might need his support instead of just being the perfect accessory to his life? Riley studied me for a long moment. This is about more than just money, isn't it? This is about your past. I looked away, suddenly finding the foam on my latte fascinating. Riley was the only person who knew the full truth about my background. We'd met in college, both scholarship kids, both working multiple jobs to stay afloat. She'd seen me at my lowest points, when the strain of straddling two worlds had nearly broken me. I've never told him, Riley. About Dorchester. About Mom's job. About how bad it really was. Why not? At first, it just never came up. Then, as things got serious, I sighed. I guess I was afraid. The Whitmores are all about legacy, about proper backgrounds. What if it changed how he saw me? If it would, then he's not worth marrying, Riley said bluntly. Exactly my point. Hence, the test. Riley still looked unconvinced. And you're going to do this, when? Tonight. He's back from London, and we're having dinner at my place. She shook her head again, but there was a hint of resignation in her expression now. Well, if you're determined to do this, I can't stop you. But be careful, Liv. You might not like what you discover. That's exactly why I need to do it, I said softly. Better to know now than after I say I do. I spent the afternoon preparing. I put away the expensive artwork, turned over the framed photo of me at the governor's charity gala. I changed into jeans and a simple sweater, nice, but not the designer clothes Alexander was used to seeing me in. I cooked a modest meal instead of ordering in from our favorite restaurant. When the doorbell rang at 7, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. There's my beautiful fiancé, Alexander said, stepping inside with a bouquet of roses and a quick kiss. His eyes, the exact blue of a summer sky, crinkled at the corners as he smiled. I missed you. For a moment, I faltered. He looked so genuinely happy to see me, so warmly affectionate. Was I making a terrible mistake? I missed you too, I replied, taking the flowers. How was London? Profitable, he winked, following me to the kitchen. Though not as enjoyable without you there. We chatted as I put the finishing touches on dinner, a simple pasta dish, not the elaborate meals we usually shared. Alexander talked about the people he'd met, the deals he'd made, the exclusive club he'd visited with clients. With every word, my resolve strengthened. I needed to know if the man behind this privileged life could love someone who didn't share his advantages. Wine? I offered, pulling out a bottle that cost a quarter of what we typically drank. Alexander nodded, though I caught the flicker of surprise as he read the label. Sure. We sat down to eat, and I noticed him taking in the subtle changes around the apartment, the missing artwork, the simpler table setting, my casual attire. Is everything all right? He asked as we ate. You seem distracted. I set down my fork, my stomach in knots. Actually, Alex, there's something I need to tell you. His face grew serious. What is it? Is your mother okay? The genuine concern in his voice made me feel a pang of guilt for what I was about to do. Mom's fine. It's about me. About my job. Your job? His brow furrowed. I've lost it, I said plainly, forcing myself to meet his eyes. Alexander blinked, then reached for my hand. Oh, darling, I'm so sorry. What happened? Budget cuts, I lied, hating myself a little but pressing on. The entire department was let go. That's terrible, he said, squeezing my fingers. But don't worry. You're brilliant, you'll find something else in no time. I can talk to father. It's not just that, I interrupted. There's more. His expression grew more concerned. What else? I took a deep breath. I made a bad investment. A really bad one. How bad? I've lost almost everything, I whispered, forcing tears into my eyes. My savings, my investments. I even had to take out a loan I can't repay. I might lose the apartment. Alexander's hand withdrew from mine slowly, his expression shifting from sympathy to confusion. That doesn't sound like you, Olivia. You're always so careful with money. I thought it was a sure thing, I said, the lie burning my throat. A colleague had a tip about a tech startup. I invested heavily. The company folded. I looked down at my plate. I was stupid. Alexander was silent for a long moment, processing this information. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. Well, obviously I'll help you sort this out. We're getting married, what's mine is yours. Relief flooded through me. Maybe I'd been wrong to doubt him. The thing is, Alex. I hesitated, then plunged ahead. This might affect our life together. I can't contribute what I thought I could to our marriage. Not financially, anyway. That's not important, he said, but there was a tightness around his eyes that hadn't been there before. It changes things, I insisted. We might need to rethink our plans. The house in Beacon Hill, the summer place on the vineyard. The wedding itself. What are you saying? His voice had cooled several degrees. I'm saying I'm essentially broke, Alex. I have nothing to offer except myself. The words hung between us. Alexander's jaw tightened, and he set down his glass with deliberate care. I see. 2 simple words, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. You're upset, I said, watching him closely. I'm surprised, he replied, not meeting my eyes. This is a lot to take in. I know. I'm sorry. And I was sorry for the deception, sorry for the doubt, sorry for the growing certainty that I was about to get my answer, and it wasn't the one I'd hoped for. We should talk about this another time, he said, standing up with a suddenness that made me flinch. I have an early meeting tomorrow. Alex. I just need some time to process this, Olivia. It's been a long day, and I'm still jet-lagged. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, disheveling it in a way I rarely saw. We'll figure this out. Don't worry. Don't worry. As if my fictional financial ruin was a minor inconvenience, like a delayed flight or a lost reservation. As if I hadn't just told him our entire future might need to be reconsidered. He didn't kiss me goodbye. Just grabbed his coat and left with a distracted "I'll call you tomorrow." The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded like the final note of a symphony. I sat alone at the table, staring at the half-eaten meal. Alexander had failed the first part of the test. He hadn't stayed to comfort me, hadn't assured me that money didn't matter, that we'd face this crisis together. But perhaps I was being unfair. It was a shock, after all. He needed time. Tomorrow, I told myself. Tomorrow he'd call, and we'd talk, and he'd show me the man I believed he was. But tomorrow came and went. No call. No text. Just silence from the man who was supposed to love me through better or worse. I spent the day alternating between checking my phone and berating myself for the whole idea. Had I taken things too far? Made the scenario too extreme? Perhaps I should have opted for a smaller financial setback, something that would test his character without threatening the lifestyle he assumed we'd share. By evening, I was a mess of anxiety and doubt. I called Riley. "He hasn't called," I said as soon as she picked up. "Not once, all day." "Shit," Riley breathed. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. Wait, I guess." I paced around my living room. Maybe he's just processing. You know how men are with emotions. Maybe, Riley said, but she sounded doubtful. Or maybe I've made a terrible mistake, I groaned, sinking onto my couch. What if I've ruined everything for nothing? Liv, listen to me, Riley's voice sharpened. If he can't handle the idea of you going through financial hardship, then he's not the right person for you. Full stop. I knew she was right, but it didn't make the silence from Alexander any easier to bear. Give it one more day, Riley advised. If you haven't heard from him by tomorrow evening, you have your answer. One more day turned into 2. Then 3. Still no word from Alexander. I checked with mutual friends. He wasn't sick, wasn't out of town, wasn't locked in meetings. He was simply choosing not to contact me. On the 4th day, my phone finally rang. Alexander's mother. "Olivia, dear," Victoria Whitmore's crisp voice came through the speaker. "I think we need to meet." My stomach dropped. "Is everything all right with Alex?" "That's what I'd like to discuss." "Are you free this afternoon? Say, 4 o'clock at the Four Seasons?" I agreed, dread pooling in my stomach. Alexander hadn't even bothered to face me himself. He'd sent his mother to do his dirty work. Victoria was already seated when I arrived at the tea room, impeccable as always in a Chanel suit, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon. She didn't rise to greet me, just gestured to the chair across from her. "Thank you for coming, Olivia," she said, stirring a spoonful of honey into her Earl Grey with practiced precision. "I thought it best we speak in person." I sat down, keeping my back straight, my expression neutral. "Where's Alexander?" Victoria sighed, setting down her spoon with a delicate clink. "Alexander has told me about your situation," she said, ignoring my question. "Has he?" "Yes." She took a small sip of her tea. "And while I sympathize, I think we need to discuss what this means for the wedding." My heart sank, but I kept my voice steady. "What did Alex say it means?" "He's concerned, naturally. The Whitmores have a certain position to maintain. Certain responsibilities." I nodded slowly, the pieces falling into place. "And you think I can no longer help him maintain that position?" "I think," she said carefully, "that the match made sense when you were both bringing equal assets to the table. Now, the balance has shifted significantly." "I see." I folded my hands in my lap to stop them from shaking. "And what does Alexander want?" Victoria set down her teacup, her expression perfectly composed. He thinks it might be wise to postpone the wedding until your situation stabilizes. Postpone. Not cancel, that would be too crass, too direct for the Whitmores. Just an elegant, indefinite delay until the poor girl either got her money back or got the message. I appreciate your candor, Victoria, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Please tell Alexander that I received his message clearly. He cares for you, Olivia, she said, reaching for a small pastry. But marriage is a practical matter as well as a romantic one. Surely you understand that, given your background in finance. Indeed, I replied, standing up. Please excuse me. I suddenly find I've lost my appetite for tea. I walked out of the Four Seasons with my head high, tears threatening but held at bay by a surge of cold fury. Alexander hadn't even had the courage to tell me himself. He'd sent his mother, like I was some business deal to be tactfully restructured. The test was over. And Alexander Whitmore, with all his pedigree and privilege, had failed spectacularly. He failed, I told Riley as soon as she opened her apartment door. His mother just told me they want to postpone the wedding until my financial situation improves. Riley pulled me into a fierce hug. That absolute bastard. I let her guide me to her couch, where a bottle of wine and 2 glasses were already waiting. Riley had known, somehow, that I'd need this tonight. I knew he was privileged, she said, pouring me a generous glass. But I never thought he'd be this shallow. I did, I admitted, taking a large sip. That's why I did the test. I just hoped I'd be proven wrong. And now what? Now I tell him the truth. And then I end it. Riley's eyes widened. You're going to tell him it was a test? He deserves to know why I'm breaking up with him. Are you sure? You could just accept the postponement and ghost him. Let him wonder what happened to you. I shook my head. That's not who I am. Besides, I want him to know exactly what he threw away, and why. We spent the evening plotting my final conversation with Alexander. By the time I left Riley's apartment, I had a clear plan and a renewed sense of purpose. The pain was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but it was overshadowed by determination. I sent Alexander a text before I went to bed, we need to talk. My place. Tomorrow. 7 p.m. His response came quickly, I'll be there. No terms of endearment. No questions about how I was doing. Just a businesslike confirmation from the man who, a week ago, had called me the love of his life. I spent the next day reclaiming my space. I returned the artwork to its place on the walls, put back the photos I'd hidden, laid out financial statements showing my actual healthy bank accounts, investment portfolios, and my still very secure job. This wasn't just about exposing Alexander's shallowness. It was about affirming my own worth, about refusing to be ashamed of what I'd built. Alexander arrived precisely at 7, looking tired but impeccable in his tailored suit. He kissed my cheek, brief, formal, and sat on the edge of the sofa like he was preparing for a difficult business negotiation. Olivia, he began, I think we need to discuss. I lied to you, I interrupted. His carefully prepared speech halted. What? I lied. About losing my job. About the bad investment. About being broke. I gestured to the financial statements on the coffee table. It was a test, Alex. And you failed. His face went through a rapid succession of emotions, confusion, shock, anger, and finally, relief. A test? What are you talking about? I wanted to know if you loved me, or for what I could bring to the table. If you would stand by me if I suddenly couldn't contribute financially to our marriage. That's insane, he sputtered, standing up. You lied about something that serious just to test me? Yes, I said calmly. And you proved exactly what I feared. At the first sign that I might not be the perfect, financially secure wife material, you sent your mother to indefinitely postpone our wedding. I was in shock, he defended, pacing the room. You dropped a bomb on me. I needed time to think. For days to think, Alex. For days without a single call or text to check on me, to see how I was coping with what, for all you knew, was a financial catastrophe. He had the grace to look uncomfortable at that. I was trying to figure out how to handle the situation. No, I corrected. You were trying to figure out how to handle me. How to extricate yourself from an engagement that suddenly seemed less advantageous. That's not fair, he protested, but his eyes kept darting to the financial statements on the table. Isn't it? When I told you I'd lost everything, you disappeared. And when you finally decided what to do, you sent your mother to deliver the message. I crossed my arms. Tell me, Alex, if I'd really been broke, would you have stood by me? Would you have married me anyway? He hesitated too long. That's what I thought, I said, sliding the engagement ring off my finger and placing it on the coffee table between us. I think we both know this engagement is over. Olivia, wait, Alexander reached for my hand. I love you. This is all just a misunderstanding. No, it isn't. It's perfect clarity. I stepped back, out of his reach. You love a version of me that fits perfectly into your world. The real me, the one who might struggle, who might need you to stand by her through genuine hardship, that's not who you signed up for. You're being unfair, he said, but his eyes kept darting to the ring on the table, to the evidence that his wealthy fiancé was still intact. Maybe, I conceded. But I needed to know, Alex. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. So that's it? You lie to me, manipulate me, and then blame me when I don't react exactly how you wanted? I blame you for showing me that your love is conditional, I replied, keeping my voice steady. That it depends on what I can bring to the table beyond just being me. This is ridiculous. He snatched up the ring. If you want to throw away what we have over some insane test, that's your choice. It is, I agreed. And I'm making it. I walked to the door and opened it. There's one more thing you should know, Alex. He paused at the threshold, his face hard. My mother wasn't a professor's wife. She was a housekeeper. We lived in Dorchester, and there were times we couldn't afford to keep the lights on. I worked as a janitor to help pay for Harvard. I met his gaze directly. That's who I really am. And I deserved someone who would love that girl just as much as they loved the polished version you met. Something shifted in his expression, surprise, confusion, perhaps even a hint of shame. But it was too late. Goodbye, Alexander, I said softly. And I closed the door on the man who had failed to love the real me. The aftermath was messy, as breakups often are. The Whitmores tried to control the narrative, a mutual decision, they told their social circle, due to differences in long-term goals. Victoria even called me, suggesting we coordinate our stories to minimize gossip. I declined. I'm not ashamed of why I ended the engagement, I told her. Alex failed to show the character I would expect from a husband. You tricked him, she countered, ice in her voice. I tested him, I corrected. And if he had passed, if he had shown even a fraction of the loyalty and support I would have offered him in a similar situation, we'd still be planning our wedding. She hung up without saying goodbye. Alexander tried to reconcile, once his pride had recovered from the initial blow. He sent flowers, called, even showed up at my office with promises that he'd do better and prove himself. But the spell was broken. I could no longer look at him without seeing the man who had sent his mother to postpone our wedding when he thought I was in financial ruin. The man who had valued my bank account over my character. My mother, when I finally told her the whole story, sighed deeply. "Oh, Livy," she said, taking my hands in hers. "I always worried that you were ashamed of where we came from. That's why you never told him the truth." "I wasn't ashamed," I protested. I didn't think it mattered." She gave me a sad smile. "It always matters, Mija. Our past shapes who we are." She was right, of course. I had spent so many years trying to outrun my background, trying to reshape myself into someone who belonged in the glossy world of high finance and old money. But in doing so, I had denied an essential part of myself, and attracted a man who loved only that carefully curated image. Slowly, I began to reclaim the parts of me I had hidden away. I reconnected with old friends from Dorchester. I volunteered at the community center where I'd once received help with college applications. I told colleagues about my mother's work as a housekeeper, about my own journey from poverty to privilege. And I found, to my surprise, that no one cared. If anything, people respected me more for the obstacles I had overcome. 6 months after ending my engagement, I met someone new. James was a pediatric surgeon, dedicated and kind, with a laugh that made me want to hear it again and again. On our third date, I told him everything, about Dorchester, about the test, about Alexander's failure. "I understand why you did it," he said when I finished. "But I hope you won't feel the need to test me that way." "Why not?" I asked, curious rather than defensive. He considered the question seriously. "Because I grew up poor too. I know what it's like to count pennies for dinner, to worry about keeping the lights on." He reached for my hand across the table. "And I know that a person's worth has nothing to do with their bank account. It wasn't that simple, of course. Trust takes time to build. But with James, I found myself able to be authentic in a way I never had been with Alexander. I didn't need to hide my past or curate my present. I could just be Olivia, all of me, the girl from Dorchester and the woman from Morgan Stanley, with nothing left in the shadows. A year later, as James and I planned our future together, a modest house, work we loved, dreams we shared, I thought about my broken engagement and the painful, necessary lesson it had taught me. Sometimes, a single question can save you from a lifetime of regret. Would the person you love still love you if everything else was stripped away? For Alexander, the answer had been no. For James, I didn't need to ask. I already knew. And for myself, I had found the most important answer of all: I was enough. Just as I was. Completely enough. The engagement to Alexander Whitmore had ended. But my real life, authentic, unburdened by pretense, was just beginning.